listeners. Welcome to episode 86 of Cell and Gene, the podcast. I'm your host, Erin Harris, and you're about to listen to my conversation with Therapeutics Co-Founder and CEO, Paul Bresge. Therapeutics is a clinical stage optogenetics gene therapy company for blinding diseases. And Paul co-founded it because when his daughter was 15, she was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa, which is a genetic condition that causes progressive vision loss due to the degeneration of the retina. We talk through optogenetics and how the company's optogenetics approach differs from gene therapies on the market, and how for patients at the end stage of the disease, they're working toward vision restoration, not just slowing disease progression. Thanks to a strong syndicate of investors, Ray was able to launch the Vision Resource and Assessment Institute, or VRAE. You'll hear all about VRAE and its purpose, but an interesting tidbit is that VRAE is intentionally located right across the street from the John Wayne Airport in Southern California. Airports can be especially challenging and stressful for people with vision challenges. And so the location of the airport and VRAE is really important to the patient. It's right nearby, so the patient can begin testing with as little stress as possible. We talk through so much more in this episode that you'll find valuable and interesting. 86 episodes in, and I'll share with you that I've had the good fortune and pleasure to talk to some of the cell and gene therapy sector's best and brightest. And Paul's definitely on that list. I think you'll hear it in his voice that Paul is deeply passionate about and grateful for the science and how far it's come and the roadmap for it for blinding diseases. And so without further ado, check out my conversation with Therapeutics' Paul Bresge. Enjoy. Hi, Paul. Thanks for joining me on Cell and Gene, the podcast. Welcome.
Hi, Erin. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. All right. So talk to us a little bit about Therapeutics and the company's mission.
Of course. So Therapeutics was established in early 2021 with a very specific mission of restoring vision to patients who are blind or nearly blind. So essentially end-stage disease patients in various different disease indications, with the primary target disease being retinitis pigmentosa.
Good. Okay. And we're going to break down certainly retinitis pigmentosa in a little bit. But before we do, talk to us a little bit about optogenetics. What is it, and how does optogenetic gene therapy work to restore retinal diseases like retinitis pigmentosa?
Sure, of course. So what we're doing essentially is we're taking a protein that's found in nature. This is really the most light-sensitive protein, and we've bioengineered it specifically for human vision restoration. How the gene therapy comes in is that we're actually using an AAV gene therapy to deliver that protein to specific cells in the retina. So depending on the target indication, for example, as mentioned, our target disease is retinitis pigmentosa. So we're targeting the retinal ganglion cells. And then in the diseases like Stargardt's disease and geographic atrophy, we're taking that same protein, but then we're specifically delivering that protein to the bipolar cells by using an on-bipolar promoter as part of our construct.
Gotcha. Okay. As of this recording, Therapeutics is in phase 1 clinical trial for its RTX-015 for retinitis pigmentosa. So I'd love to hear the explanation of the genetic disease itself.
Sure.
And then if you could provide us an update on the trial, that would be great.
Yeah, of course. So I mean, from a bit of a personal standpoint, I did not know anything about retinitis pigmentosa 15 years ago. I remember the first time that I heard it, I wasn't even sure how to spell it. I heard about the disease on the day that my middle daughter, her name is Tamar, she had just turned 15 at the time. She was diagnosed with the disease, and we were told by the chief ophthalmologist at Toronto Sick Kids Hospital that she was going blind and that there was absolutely nothing that can be done. So I understand, the importance of finding a therapy for these patients. What happens in the pathology of the disease, and this is how my daughter was diagnosed, is that patients typically they present with night blindness in teen years, and then that progresses to peripheral vision loss, and eventually over time, patients who have the disease will be legally blind by the time that they're 40 years old. So it is it's a progressive disease. Of course, there's a very high unmet need. There's approximately 125 to 150,000 patients in the United States with the disease. We are going very specifically, for those patients at the end stage of disease. There's such exciting work going on, in the field, particularly in regenerative medicine and cell and gene therapy. But most of the programs are really geared towards slowing down progression of disease. And I was involved in one of those programs, for about 10 years. I was the co-founder of a company called JSITE, which is a cell therapy program designed to provide neurotrophic factors in order to slow down disease. And that program is entering phase 3 right now. For patients at the end stage of disease, we're talking now about actually restoring. And what got me so, really just unbelievably excited about this program is that the animal data just showed remarkable vision restoration. So not all, because we have actually extensive studies in multiple mouse models, but to me, the most meaningful mouse model was a triple knockout mouse. So this mouse is born completely blind. It does not even have the cortical pathways developed for vision. And yet our inventor was able to restore 50% of the visual acuity of the wild type mouse and near normal contrast sensitivity, which are really important functions for vision. So when I saw this data, I was absolutely blown away at the potential, for this therapy to restore vision in these patients.
That's incredible. Briefly, how is your daughter right now?
Thank you so much for asking. I really appreciate it. She is just incredible. She was, at the time of diagnosis, the doctor, in a very inappropriate way, told her in the 5 minutes that she had her diagnosis, you should think about what you're going to study and what you're going to do, career-wise and with the rest of your life. It was unbelievable because, again, she had just turned 15 years old. And, fast forward, many years later, she actually has a master's degree in visual arts from Tufts University. And she's now in the middle of studying, her second master's degree. And she's just, absolutely barrels through life. She's, one of the strongest and most remarkable people that I know. So thank you for asking.
Absolutely. And
patients, they do incredibly well. I mean, obviously, as you can imagine, they would love, a treatment and their families would as well. But many patients like my daughter, they get through life with whatever challenges they may face. And so again, thank you for asking.
Of course. I'm glad to hear she's doing so well. I know you said there's a restoration component to this, but what level of vision restoration can patients potentially expect from the treatment?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I'll be able to answer that question much better in about a year from now. So let me rely on, what has been seen in clinic to date. So I think that it's unquestionable that there is proof of concept that optogenetics works. There are some really great programs out there. The one that I always point to is the GenSight program, which showed really remarkable vision restoration in patients. Unfortunately, the protein that was used in that, particular study and, in really all studies to date has not been light sensitive enough to be active in ambient light conditions. So what that means is that patients who have had the treatment have had to wear light-enhancing eyewear, so like very light eyewear. They're called, referred to as goggles, in order to activate the protein. Now, when you think about, people who are, blind or almost blind, they'll do anything to have, some vision back. But the I think challenge with that is that when you think about getting a therapeutic combined with a device, it makes it extremely challenging from a regulatory and commercial pathway. What separates us from these other programs is that, again, we're using the most light-sensitive protein, about 100 to 1,000 times more light-sensitive than some of the programs that have already been in clinic. So our patients should not require these light-enhancing goggles. And then the other differentiator is that we have specifically bioengineered this protein for human vision restoration, whereas the other programs have used the wild-type protein that's found in nature. It's a very long-winded way of me answering your question, which is, what can we expect? There are papers, that have been, published that suggest that patients, ideally could have restoration up to like 2070, which is quite remarkable. We're hoping, to provide very, meaningful vision restoration to patients. We're using provable endpoints that are well known to the agency, to the FDA, such as, visual acuity. So we are looking for actual visual acuity changes, and then also mobility changes. So the very first gene therapy that was ever approved was called Luxturna. That was this program. And that was approved on a mobility maze. So we are working with a very similar mobility maze. We've had outstanding interactions, with the agency. So we're very much aligned in terms of how we've developed our endpoints. And we're expecting patients to have, very, very meaningful, vision restoration. If I may go on just a little bit, just to tell you about how we've set up our study for success, if you don't mind.
Of course, go right ahead.
So we were, extremely fortunate. I wake up every single day with such gratitude because we have had, very strong financing all the way from our seed round back in 2021, led by 4Bio Capital. California Institute for Regenerative Medicine has given us $8 million in non-dilutive capital. And then back last year in May, we raised $100 million led by Novo. And we have MRLV, Merck Ventures, we have Deerfield, we have Platinus, we have 4Bio, we have Norwest in the syndicate as well. So very, very strong syndicate of investors. So we have been able to use those resources to really set ourselves up for success. So for example, we've had an open IND for several months now, but we only started enrolling patients recently because what we've done is we've set up our own vision research and assessment institute. It's called the VRAE. It's in Southern California, very close to John Wayne Airport, because I know from my own daughter how stressful airports are. And we anticipate that many patients will have to travel in for testing. So we put it in John Wayne Airport, really low stress, across the street, patients can come in. And the testing takes several hours. So when you think about, clinical trials, the retina clinics, even the best retina clinics, in the country and in the world, they're not really set up to test patients who are blind or almost blind. These patients, they up until now, they haven't had anything that's promising for therapy. So we built our own vision research institute. We brought in top talent, so some of the top low vision experts in the country who are working there. We have a battery of tests, including the ones that I mentioned. And we've had an extremely fortunate setup where we've had a run-in observational study that's been ongoing for a few months, where we've brought in our patient population. We set them through the battery of tests. We brought them in again to understand test, retest variability. So we have such a great understanding of these endpoints that when the patients come in for the interventional study, we'll be able to, have a really good idea of what the efficacy looks like. So again, I think we've really set ourselves up for success, and hopefully, again, we'll see very meaningful changes for these patients.
Wonderful, wonderful, excellent. I want to take a little bit of a step back. You mentioned, of course, Sparks Luxturna, and that being, of course, the first gene therapy.
Right.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about Ray Therapeutics' approach to optogenetics and how it does, in fact, differ from these other gene therapies, and even the ones that have already been approved.
Sure.
How is the approach, in fact, different?
Yeah, okay, so great question again. So I think I've already explained how we differentiate ourselves from other optogenetics programs, just in terms of, the protein that we're using, the fact that it's, been specifically bioengineered, and that we don't anticipate that patients will require light-enhancing eyewear. How we differentiate from other gene therapy programs is really, really important, and that is that our therapy is independent of the causative gene. So Luxturna was remarkable. I mean, Jean Bennett is my absolute hero. I love her. She's a close friend, and she's literally my hero. The unfortunate part of that therapy is that it only addresses about 1% of the patient population with retinitis pigmentosa. So there's about 80 or 90 identifiable genes, and about 50% of RP patients don't even have an identifiable gene. So there's potentially, a couple of hundred different mutations. So when you think about the approach of trying to correct, the vision for these patients one gene at a time, it just becomes, I would imagine, impossible. So the fact that our approach is agnostic or independent of the causative gene, it allows us to treat anybody with any mutation with retinitis pigmentosa within our patient population. So again, the more late stage, 2200, or all the way down to complete blindness. That's a huge differentiator. The other differentiator is that, and I mentioned this earlier, most of the programs that are out there are looking to slow down progression of disease, whereas we're looking to actually restore vision. So that sets us apart from, most of the programs that are out there in the gene therapy space.
Sure. Thank you for that detailed explanation. That makes sense. In addition to RP, Ray Therapeutics, you do have other degenerative retinal diseases in your pipeline that you're working on. So talk to us a little bit about that. What does your pipeline look like?
Sure. So, as mentioned, earlier, we are targeting bipolar cells for Stargardt's disease. So Stargardt's is essentially a juvenile form of macular degeneration. So it's a rare disease. There's about 40,000 patients in the United States with the disease. We think that our total addressable market is about 10 to 15,000, of those patients. And if we see the proof of concept that we expect to in Stargardt's, again, if we see this, restoration to the levels that we're expecting, that will provide a really nice segue to then move into geographic atrophy, which is the advanced form of macular degeneration. And there's about 1 million to 1.5 million patients in the United States with geographic atrophy. And we actually see that total addressable market as being all of those patients. So our pipeline, if you look at it on our website, is essentially retinitis pigmentosa, targeting by retinal ganglion cells, and then Stargardt's disease, bipolar, geographic atrophy, bipolar. But then there are a whole lot of other inherited retinal diseases as well. And again, the pathology of these diseases is essentially the same. So if we're able to treat RP, and Stargardt's as inherited retinal diseases and then geographic atrophy as a large indication, we should be able to treat essentially most, if not all, inherited retinal diseases with the same approach.
That's incredible, considering all is a big word. So that's really, really exciting. And that actually leads me to my next question. You have quite a bit on your plate, but what does 2025 look like for Ray Therapeutics?
Oh my goodness, 2025 is going to be a very, very exciting year. So we'll start. Obviously, our first study is open label. So we will be able to see the data real time. The other unique part of our program, which is incredibly exciting, is that we should see efficacy very, very quickly, within a couple of months of dosing patients. So again, when you think about the programs that are targeted to slow down progression of disease, that takes a long time because these are generally slowly progressing diseases. When we're looking to restore, we expect that within 2 months, or by the time that the patients come in for their 3-month efficacy assessment, we should be able to see changes. So 2025 is going to be an absolutely, monumental year for our company.
All right, listeners, that wraps up this episode of Cell and Gene, the podcast featuring Ray Therapeutics' Paul Bresge. Thanks so much for tuning in. Visit us at cellandgene.com, subscribe to this podcast, and tell your peers to do the same. And we'll talk to you soon.